Pfizer has made quite a bit of headlines recently as it relates to stock and investment news, and this is primarily due to a lot of the positivity and the optimism around their vaccine trials and some of the success that they've had. Now, I touched on this a little bit in my previous video, but what I want to accomplish in this video is to deep dive a little bit more into the financials of this vaccine, what that could mean for Pfizer, what that could also mean for the stock price, and more importantly, what are some of the risk factors involved if you were to make an investment decision, specifically a buy decision on the news of this vaccine alone. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit more here. So stay tuned. Hey folks, Richard Walls here, and if it's your first time on the channel, I'd like to welcome you. What it's all about is helping you with career development and personal finance. And if that's the type of content you want to see a little bit more of, do make sure to subscribe down below and hit the notification bell so you get notified of when I post new content. And of course, if you like what you see throughout this video, do make sure to also hit the like button. It helps out my channel quite a bit. So with that said, let's get to it. So before I go into the financials here, one thing I did want to comment and clarify is that, again, this video is more so if you're looking at this vaccine news as an investment opportunity or a trade opportunity, that's what this is for. If you're looking at Pfizer from a long-term perspective or for a long-term play or for dividends, that's a completely different story, and there are other factors you might want to consider. But in this case, it's more around the news of the vaccine, what that's going to do financially, and what you need to consider because there's a lot going on here. So pulling up Pfizer's most recent annual report, this is for FY19, we see that their revenues, their reported revenues, are at $51.8 billion, and this is actually a decline year over year. And their earnings per share shows an increase year over year, but it's still down a little bit from 2 years prior to that. So, I mean, if you look historically, it's sort of been in this same range. So we haven't seen any major breakout one way or the other. Revenues have also been more or less the same. Now, if you pull up the most recent quarterly report, you'll also see that they're projecting a decline in revenue for FY20. And of course, this is due to demand slowdown in the other drugs they have in their portfolio this year. Now that you have that context, let's look at the vaccine itself and what are some of the financials around that. Here we've got roughly $20 per dose. And each complete round for this vaccination requires 2 doses. So really $40 per vaccination, if you will. But from a dosage standpoint, $20 is where it's at. And from what we understand from recent press releases that Pfizer has put out, from all the proposals and the tentative agreements they have with various governments and regions, they're looking at an estimate of 1.3 billion doses to be produced next year, in calendar year 21. And I think we've got that number here. Yep. So up to 1.3 billion doses by end of 2021. Now, you'd have to unpack that a little bit more because what's included in that 1.3 billion doses is a lot of contingencies. It's contingent upon, of course, safety, proven safety, which we're now starting to see that. And it's contingent upon many other factors. So it's certainly no guarantee that there will be that demand for that many doses, but that's, of course, the potential. So at $20 a dose, that equates to a $26 billion revenue number that should be additive. And current forecasts from Pfizer, of course, peg FY20 revenue to decline a little bit to 49 billion. So for simple math, let's assume nothing dramatic happens in FY21. I guess their fiscal year 21 to spur growth. So let's assume a $50 billion base. Nothing too crazy happens and they don't grow apart from the vaccine. Now, this additive 26 billion would be just over 50% growth. If this were added to that, of course, that would be an extraordinary number. Not only would that be an extraordinary number, this would also be done at a profit. Now, what we don't know is exactly what that margin percentage looks like. We don't know the details of how much it costs to develop, how much it costs to produce. I mean, there have been some figures thrown about as far as what Pfizer has contributed and what BioNTech has contributed in terms of R&D, but we don't know exactly what that number is. So nonetheless, it could help earnings per share. We just don't know by how much. Now, if you're watching and getting excited about what I just mentioned to you, I'm gonna ask of you two things. The first is, if you happen to be getting value out of this video, or you just happen to like the sound of my voice, definitely make sure to hit the like button on this video. Again, it helps out my channel quite a bit, and I'd very much appreciate it. But the second thing is, I would encourage you to temper your excitement a little bit, because now I'm going to go into the risk factors here. Everything that I just mentioned in terms of financials, there's a lot of caveats. And so let's go into that now. Now, first caveat, I mentioned this in my previous video, which you can check out in the link in the description below or the card above. But the first major caveat, and this is probably one of the biggest in my opinion, is that because of all the attention that this, the situation has received, there are a lot of companies out there looking to develop their own vaccines. So you've got a handful of competitors, both large and small, and some in partnerships with one another, developing a vaccine. But you've got a lot of competition here. You've got a lot of potentially viable candidates. And what that's going to do is it's going to likely drive the price down. Not only will it drive the price down, but there also may be some reasons that have yet to come to light as to why some vaccines, or another vaccine rather, might be preferable to Pfizer's vaccine. Could be different regions might have different preferences, or because of certain logistical challenges, it may not be suitable for some regions versus others. And then there's also, from the pricing standpoint, is the social or PR pressures that might come along here. So for example, AstraZeneca, if I can pull that up here, one of their headlines here was the vaccine, or at least the company has stated that they will sell the vaccine at no profit. And there are, of course, some caveats to that. It's for developing countries that they will sell these at cost. And I think there's another caveat here where, depending on what point you read about what they've put out, it's, I don't think, indefinite. It says here in perpetuity to low and middle income countries, but then for the rest of the developed world, we'll be at a profit. But nonetheless, the statement has been put out there that profit is not their main driver. So again, going back to Pfizer, might they fall in line in a similar way to where, it certainly wouldn't be as profitable as otherwise. The second caveat is we don't know exactly the arrangement that Pfizer has with BioNTech. So the big revenue number I gave you earlier, there's a lot of assumptions built into that. And for one, we don't know exactly how much of the revenue is going to which company. And again, it could be that Pfizer captures all that revenue because maybe they put in more money up front. They're doing the manufacturing, the logistics, and BioNTech is supporting with their mRNA platform upon which this vaccine is being developed. But again, we don't know what the arrangement is, so it may be the case that that revenue is not fully captured by Pfizer. And because there are a lot of contingencies tied to that 1.3 billion doses number that I provided earlier, again, there's so many things that could come up that could reduce that number. Maybe due to cost, that number could come down quite a bit. So these are things that we don't quite know. And third one is there are still uncertainties related to that vaccine, namely the platform upon which Pfizer, BioNTech have developed their vaccine. The solution is based on messenger RNA, which is a still evolving technology with a handful of drugs in the pipeline from various biotech companies that are taking this a similar path. So a lot of drugs going through clinical trials right now that are designed to address other illnesses, but there's no drug in the market right now with that as a platform that's been approved. So this vaccine would be a first in the world with an mRNA platform derived solution. And as with any first, there are a number of risks, be it, could be long-term side effects that for patients that we might not know about today. Of course, they're doing their trials and they're showing that it is safe. Certainly that's short term. We know more or less what that looks like. The long term is a little less known. And given how fast this is all developing, it's hard to understand what that long term actually looks like. It would be suggested because of this delivery mechanism that there wouldn't be any long term effects, but again, you just don't exactly know for sure. And not only that, because this type of drug hasn't been in the market yet, there may be some unforeseen challenges when it comes to manufacturing. This hasn't been manufactured at scale in terms of logistics, and I bring logistics up in particular for Pfizer because the vaccine they've come up with is required to be stored negative 70 degrees Celsius, which is more than the other vaccines. The other vaccines can be stored at normal freezer temperatures. This requires a little bit more. So in terms of logistics and cost, that's simply going to add to that and make it less competitive compared to other drugs. And of course, Pfizer is going to signal confidence that they have the capability to manufacture, store, transport at scale, because of course, why wouldn't they signal that? They're trying to get government contracts. They're trying to be the first to market with approvals with this vaccine. And one resource I came across here that's fairly convenient in terms of comparing the different vaccines that are out there. Pfizer BioNTech, you have that at the top. Pricing, this of course varies a little bit. Does by the end of the year. I mean, we're in December now. It's not going to be a ton relative to what we might expect in 2021. But the platform, messenger RNA for Pfizer. Moderna also a similar, actually the same platform, but a different mechanism, of course. There's the pricing for that, also requires 2 doses. AstraZeneca, this is a more traditional vaccine, but it's at $3 per dose and also doesn't require the same temperature storage. And then J&J, again, similar platform here, 1 dose, $10 per dose. So this is all to say that you've got competition. You've got competition that are, if approved and if proven to be effective, could undercut and it could render Pfizer's position with their vaccine more or less moot. And so all the goodness that you've seen with the stock price recently, that's going to more or less vanish. Right now, there's a lot of optimism, of course, because they're making a lot of assumptions about what kind of revenues the company can produce in the following year as a result of this. But there's so many challenges and so many risk factors here that for anyone to base an investment decision, specifically a buy decision due to the vaccine, I think there's a lot of risk here. And there's not a ton of upside as I see it. If there is upside, the probability is not going to be incredibly high. In its history, the highest it's been was around $44. There we go. $44 was the high point back in '99. And it seems like it's getting close to that again. Most recently, it was at $42 or $44, possibly in 2018. But again, for me to look at this and suggest that it could break past that point, it could break 44 or 45, that would be a tall order on the basis of the vaccine. Now, if you're, again, looking into this for a longer term play or for dividends, that's a different story, and you might have more of a case there. If you already have this investment, I could see holding it being as good a decision as anything else. If you bought this more recently and you're hoping for a quick in and out, this might be a good time to sell. But again, we'll leave that to you to decide, for you to do your due diligence. As a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just sharing a little bit of what I've observed and what I've come to understand about the vaccine and some of the financial impact we might expect and how that might reflect in the stock price. So that's my 2 cents. I hope you found this video helpful. And if you have any questions on this, do let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you have any of your own inputs or own ideas about Pfizer as an investment or as a trade, would certainly love to see that feedback down there as well. So with that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you around.